Now, the theme of this talk is fracture, but I wanted to start on a positive note. And that's what we saw just a few weeks ago with Mythos, this extraordinary technology that was introduced by Anthropic and took the world by storm. A form of technology which is, in many ways, a holy grail. So you see AI which can look for vulnerabilities, cyber vulnerabilities in platforms much quicker than any human being could ever do. And that is brilliant. But of course, the Holy Grail has a dark side. And if that technology is turned against you or gets into the wrong hands, it could be devastating. And what happened after that was, I think, quite extraordinary and historic in the way that regulators and governments are looking at AI. Suddenly, everyone agreed. So whether that was Christine Lagarde or Scott Bessent or just about every president and prime minister around the world who spoke about this, they all said something needs to be done. And I'm really hoping that on children and AI safety, the same cohesive force can take place. And that's what we want to discuss today, coming together, bringing consistency around the world. And we've got this brilliant panel to explore that with us. But yes, we do have some fractures. So I'm going to go to you first, Cy. Can you just orientate us around the relationship between, in particular, the US and Europe, and how that's impacting on AI and the way that we look at AI safety?
Thank you, Jonathan. I just want to say it's a special pleasure to be here with Raúl, who was the elected DA, as I was the DA for Manhattan, from Albuquerque. So it's good to see you again, and thank you for the great work you've done. I think everyone here knows the history. This is what's sort of amazing about all these technical issues. Europe came at regulation in this field based upon its history with governments accessing personal records and controlling communication in World War II. It has since then always been focused on human dignity and regulation. Britain is somewhere in between, and the United States is not focused on human dignity in this area. It's focused on commerce. And so what matters to the United States is that we beat China in the race to AI dominance, that the tech companies are given as much leeway as they can possibly be given in order to encourage them to have us win what is, for this president, the ultimate war and victory, which is to keep us ahead of China. So that's, I think, a inadequate but short summary of three very different philosophies. And you may remember when Biden was president, he was quite involved in AI regulation. I mean, he created a very complex 5-pillar approach to AI, and then he lost the election. And Trump, of course, as you may know, just reading the papers, has been completely anti-regulating AI, and has in fact been verbal and vocal and abusive in describing all that. But it's interesting what you don't expect may happen. When Mythos came out with an AI model that in fact could get through all the blocks that we think now block computers from being cracked, when Trump, I think, understood, or the government understood, that this was a model that was coming out that they needed to control, they had to deal with Anthropic, who owns the model. So although Trump, on his first day in office, threw out the door Biden's AI controls, now Trump is considering putting in some of those very same controls about pre-marketing access by the government, at least, to the model, so that in response to national security concerns, those perhaps unwittingly and surprisingly, those national security concerns, Trump's safety concerns, and this president, who was against AI regulation, is now, I think, trying to sort a way through where there will be regulation run through the Department of Justice, through the Department of Defense, in the service of national security.
In the context of children's safety and AI, though, do you think there's a chink of light too, that this could start off a positive conversation in the US in the same way that we've seen on
with Mythos?
Yeah.
I don't really think so. I think that it's another, it's another warp speed development that I think it will increase risk. Absolutely. And by the way, when I was the Manhattan DA, I determined that really cybercrime and now AI-enabled crime, these are as important risks to society as is climate change and conflict. These are massively impactful. So I don't think AI and Mythos is going to necessarily create an even playing field and make government making people safer.
Brando, can I go to you next? Because obviously you've had huge success with the EU AI Act. But much of today, in a way, has been about the failure of legislation. The fact that legislative processes, wherever you are in the world, can't move quickly enough, and it's always outpaced by technology. You've just had to redraft parts of the AI Act for notification, and you're now looking at chatbots. How do you, as a legislator, respond to this lightning speed technology progress and countries and governments who just are really failing to keep up?
Well, yes, that's the challenge that we have in front of us. And we have tried immediately when we work on the AI Act to confront it heads on by choosing to not regulate especially the technology itself or the companies, but rather the use cases. So to concentrate on the concrete use cases which stay even if the technology change. But you are right, things move very quickly. And in fact, I think we managed to use a wrong deregulatory push that we had in EU that was in these months along the discussions of the digital omnibus to in fact introduce some new actions that were needed. You mentioned it. We managed just last week to introduce a ban on notification apps of AI systems that deal non-consensual notification. I think it was important to use this idea of reopening some legislation to in fact confront some real emergential action that was needed, because we have seen how difficult it was. And why we had to do that? Because, as you said, we have an issue about how we implement legislation, how we enforce it. Because the original AI Act, I've written part of it with the Commission, with the European Council. So I can say that I think it's very clear that it could already stop the notification, but it had to work at the model level. And so we needed more cooperation by the big developers to actually stop the notification at the model level. And that cooperation that we needed to push a bit was still not there at the pace needed. So in fact, enforcement and making these laws not only a piece of paper, not only virtue signaling, as you say in English, but to actually make them real, they need to give the real power, the real resources to those that have to enforce them, to actually make them real and be able to protect vulnerable groups, including children. And let me just say one thing, referring to the last intervention, because I want to be a little more optimistic on one point, because in this new mandate, I'm also the chair of the delegation for relations with the United States. So I'm very often in US, I talk with a lot of people in Congress. My opinion is that we need to protect children, and we have been discussing this today very clearly. But children and protection of children online is also a very important entry point to build a dialogue between the two sides of the Atlantic. Because my experience is that when we talk about protection of children, we can overcome certain resistances that are linked to lobby activity, to cultural differences, and protection of children in the end is a good common language between different, even different political leanings. Obviously, there are those that do not want to say clearly that they do not care about protecting children. We have them, but we also have people that across the aisle, as you say in US, we can work together to deliver some results.
And what do you say to detractors in the US who look at Europe and they say, this is slowing growth, GDP is 38% behind, you're not keeping up, and actually that this kind of law is stifling innovation? what would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, I have a very clear idea about this. It's true, but it's not linked to the AI Act or certain legislation. If you have to be very honest, I think that probably on the data legislation, we need to update it a bit. And this is the discussion we are having to make it ready for the AI that needs, in fact, to look at how we use data. But the problems we have on that is linked to the lack of coordination of our financial markets, the lack of a real single market for digital, and the lack of opportunities for computational capabilities for AI startups in Europe. And it's not me saying that. If you talk with the AI developers, they tell you these are the issues. So in the end, what is the problem? That US, yes, is the sum of states, but they also have a strong federal policy on how to deal with AI. And you see the same with China. EU is too fragmented. We have rules that sometimes are even applied not really at European level, even if they are European rules. And we have too many efforts to develop our own innovation in a fragmented way, not as Europeans. So my recipe is more Europe in innovation. And in this way, we can be more competitive. All of us, not France versus Italy versus Spain or versus Germany.
And as a foil against that fragmentation, there couldn't be a better issue to coalesce around than children and AI and ensuring a safe future. As you said, who can disagree with that? Raúl, can I go to you next? Because I think reflecting on the conversations in the room today, I think we've seen kind of a two-tier of tech company. We've seen companies like Pinterest and Apple who clearly value safety and who are leading on that. There are other companies like Microsoft doing the same. And the other companies who really resist it. How has this happened? And how can you, as a regulator, make all ships rise?
Well, I think if you look at the difference in the experience that people have on these platforms, it's directly related to the culture that's established by the leadership team. Pinterest, for example, the leadership there has clearly made a concerted effort to balance the best interests of their users and a long-term strategy that is built on safety. But competitors in the marketplace don't feel the same pressure. And one of my roles as a prosecutor, as a litigator, is to try and apply the pressure that they will respond to better realign their culture. One thing I have to say while I'm here is that if any of my countrymen come to Europe and try to lecture Europeans about the need for liberalizing in this space, please ignore them. Do not listen when they urge you and try to mislead the European public that the path towards innovation lies in endangering your children and placing your communities at risk. It is a false choice. The truth is that these companies have the capacity and the capability right now to build safe products, to build safe platforms. And it's important for those of us in a leadership role to be able to signal to them with the work that we do right now before the next evolution in AI has sort of taken hold, to make sure that they understand that we are going to be there to be watchful, to police conduct and behavior. But we also want to make sure that we highlight, as you did earlier, responsible market leaders and responsible companies, and to help the public understand that not all companies are operating and building their business models in the same way.
And who would want to drive an unsafe car? And all the discussion today around safety standards should be translated into the industry. I want to get practical now with you, Josh, because obviously in the legal world, a huge amount of theory. The AI Act is over 700 pages long. Hope you've all read it. And but what we need is actual practical action coming out of this summit. The AI Safety Institute from Common Sense is a really good example of that. I like the fact that it's also backed by technology companies, so it's safety working very closely with the companies who are developing this technology, which sometimes regulators don't do. So your ideas for practical outputs from this?
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to obviously thank Jim, the folks at Common Sense Media, our hosts here in Copenhagen, and I truly want to thank everybody in this room for the energy that you give us. It's one thing to hear from the European Parliament, the European Commission, and talk about grander plans for everyone to act collectively, and I can't relate to it because we have a federal government that will do nothing, as a matter of fact. We say that tech bent the knee to our president. I think it's the other way around. Our president has bent the knee to big tech. And as Secretary said in video, and as we heard from our first partner, we have to act in the state of California and not wait for anybody to take action. We just can't wait. And we lead as parents. We take action as parents before anything else. And I'm a dad of 3 girls. I have a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 11-year-old. So I have a laboratory right in front of me. They're my compass, and I know exactly what we have to do. The system in the United States is a bit different, of course. We don't elect in a mechanism by a party to a parliament. We're elected in different districts, and each of us are accountable to the voters in that district, and we don't have publicly financed campaigns. So that means we're susceptible to money flooding our elections. And in the case of California, we have PACs, political action committees, that are set up by these entities, these players. OpenAI has a $100 million PAC to influence people like myself just for California. Meta set one up for $65 million for the same amount for this year. And we're seeing elections this year. We're seeing money flood into state legislative races that's unheard of. They're buying the legislature in the state of California right now. And so it's critically important that we build community. As the Secretary said, to have international standards is so critical for all of us to act together on these things. So really, to answer your question, we need firepower more than anything else in the state of California. And we need strength from overseas, like we are getting from Australia, like we're getting from Denmark and Spain and France and so forth, to be able to implement regulations that are going to be meaningful. And as we all know, when we act as islands, it doesn't work. It only works when we act collectively on all of these things.
Can I test your appetite in the education space for legislation? Because we've heard from the inspirational young people here today that they don't want to be told not to use this technology. And yet I was talking to a professor of archaeological history at Oxford recently who was saying that he has now banned all coursework on his 3-year degree because he can't guarantee that that coursework hasn't been copied or plagiarized or invented in some way by AI. So the only way to pass that degree course now is with a pen and with closed doors and a piece of paper. What's your duty to kind of step in there and be responsible and say, actually, there should be certain types of AI that are appropriate for use in education, but actually certain areas where it should not be used? How do we prevent this cognitive unloading?
We have to be intentional. I'm sure everybody has paid attention to what happened in Sweden recently, how they have made a decision to completely take technology out of the classroom in every form. We have to look at the data and let it guide us and be agnostic to ideology and truly look at things. So this is the first generation academically, intellectually, IQ scores that is performing worse than the generation before it. That's empirical. It is absolutely the obligation of the legislature, at least in California. And we expect that the decisions that we make in California, as Jim stated earlier, will ripple across the United States. So we absolutely have to step in and try things. And by the way, all of us in this room need to implement policy with humility. If we can acknowledge that we did make a mistake in not setting forth proper guardrails for social media, and we're trying to do that now with AI, then we have to constantly measure and talk collectively about the impacts and make sure that we give ourselves room to change course when we need to, if the data states that's the situation.
And Brando, from a European perspective, what's your appetite for looking at more specific targeted legislation in the area, for example, of education, where at the moment, and today we've spoke about more training, uplifting teams, but actually there's no specific rules around how this technology should be used in the classroom, and yet it's being used every day.
You know, in the United States right now, children are spending on average 5 hours a day in social media. So we have 40 million residents in the state of California. That means if you look at the averages and the deviation from the averages, there are millions of children in California that are spending more time on social media than they are in school. Let's stop and think about that for a moment. What we have to do is not just change curricula, change guidelines, get phones out of schools, try and dial back some of the ed tech, all of those things. We have to replace it. We have to invest and be intentional about outdoor learning, about the arts, about music, about sports, about providing avenues for children to replace those things. And certainly as it relates to classroom activity, because I know you're trying to get to this, but ultimately, really, we want to change behavior. It's not simply about resources and accessing technology itself, but it's about the pride that children can feel in doing things on their own.
And Brando, over to you on European perspective on that.
Well, I can tell you that even recently I had a meeting in my small hometown of La Spezia in Liguria, in my region, and teachers are worried, and they have sometimes a reaction of saying we should not teach anything of this. But I try to convince them that children will still use these technologies, and we need to give them guardrails and indications. And I think we should not be fearful of saying that we should also make limits and choose the path that has been taken already in some parts of the world of making an age limit, not only about the social media. I'm sorry, because I want to underline that we risk sometimes to forget AI in the meantime, because this needs to be taken together. And in fact, I tell you an example. The AI Act itself, with the prohibition of manipulation, it's already ready to tackle the manipulation through the AI companions. We are ready to act. You just need political will. So I want to commend, I want to be very clear, it's been extraordinary. And I want also to thank the organizers for having made the president of the European Commission make such a strong and clear speech today. But we need to not only focus on social media. It's also about AI and the way they interact together. And I think we should be clear enough to say that when we talk about making an age limit, it's about the social media, but it's also about certain AI instruments, because this is influencing how children are growing, how they think, how they act. And as I told you, we already have rules in Europe that can be applied to already reduce the harm. And they should be applied without fear of the reactions, because to be honest, our problem is that when we actually do something, we get a barrage of tweets or truths that are creating a lot of turmoil and discussion. But we should not bend the knee, as you say. We should be firm, because we are right. And many more people around the world are convinced that we are right. And I see it in the debate in the European Parliament. It's even a bit humiliating for them. Those that are against, they try to not discuss, to not say it, to move away and say it's about freedom of expression, it's about censorship. They cannot explain why they do not want to protect children. And that's why we will win this battle, in Europe, but everywhere.
And Raúl, again, thinking about these amazing young people in the room today, a lot of the discussion has been about their future in terms of jobs when they leave school and university. What job market are we leaving for them? And clearly steps can be taken now to help to protect that. In the US, we're seeing laws or proposed laws in places like Minneapolis, and I was in Seattle last week as well, around protecting certain areas of work from the use of AI. And certainly there's discussions around that in just about every country around the world now. What's your view on that? How successful could that be? Is that going to be an effective way of protecting their future?
Well, I don't think it would be news to any European to look at the American political experience at this moment and just recognize how completely dysfunctional it is. And so while I appreciate there's action happening at the local level, we need to have a broad, national, and very urgent conversation about the impact of artificial intelligence on our labor market, in addition to all of the other harms that we've been discussing. That isn't happening. I mean, that debate is largely absent from the political discourse in the United States. And so frankly, we don't have a strong record in the last 15 or 20 years of anticipating potential harms, planning ahead, and then being in a position to react. What typically happens, in our experience anyway, is a foreseeable calamity is slowly headed in our direction, and we wait until the impact is felt. And I would I hope that doesn't describe the political process in Europe, but in the United States, I imagine that we will not really engage seriously with displacement in the job market until we start to see it in the data in significant ways. There's a debate right now about whether or not we're seeing the leading edge of that, either with coders or certain other white-collar jobs. But I think it's going to take a little bit more pain and disruption before we are forced to have a national conversation. I do think this is going to be one of the dominant issues, though, in the next presidential campaign in the United States.
But just going back, I guess, to these young people in the front row, and they're thinking, what can we do now practically to help with this? What would your advice be to them? Because if they look at the kind of disorder in the US political system, they can't wait for that to resolve. We need practical steps. What can be done?
You know, the only advice I could give, and you know, forgive me because this is the part where my 16-year-old would be rolling her eyes at me. So, there are certain fundamental truths I think about being successful as an adult in the world, in the marketplace, that transcend any sort of technological contingency that you're living through right now. And what I mean by that is not to neglect your own humanity and the development of your own ability to interact with other people, to communicate, to express empathy, to understand basic social cues, to understand basic social dynamics. Because if you lean too heavily on the latest technology, you will allow those basic skills to atrophy to a certain extent. And so it is, I think, a return to a more fundamental form of education that involves deliberate debate. And I agree with the Assemblyman. I personally think we need to get tech out of the classroom completely. I think that has been something, at least in the United States, every generation of American kids for the last 25, 30 years, we get fed some new piece of free technology that's subsidized and then sent into the classroom. And it becomes a bit of a crutch, and it becomes something that, you know, is sold to us as a necessary part of navigating the sort of modern world. But it really is in the development of your own ability to engage in critical thinking, critical analysis, open debate, and understanding how other human beings are going to respond to those ideas that are fundamental, that are timeless. And we have to find a way, I think, to rediscover that.
And certainly in the UK, where I'm based, we're seeing kind of a socio-economic divide there, where the most expensive schools are the ones who are removing technology the quickest. And so, you know, if you want to go to the best school in the UK, it's one which has no technology at all. So there's a new digital divide there. Now, we've got a few minutes left. I want to give all of you an opportunity to talk about what has been missed today, because the topics have been extraordinary and so wide-ranging and completely global. But what haven't we talked about that is important in the context of this very historic day and the movement that we want to create going forward? Sai.
I don't think we pay enough attention to the public safety issues that underlie the discussion as it pertains to the security of our businesses, our persons, and our critical infrastructure. So as the DA for Manhattan, recognizing that our city was under attack by foreign actors and terrorized organizations to take down critical infrastructure that could not just damage people, but hurt people. I would just say that when we leave this room, when one leaves this room, it's not just about how educated you will get, but how we manage AI is going to be directly relevant on how secure we are. And when you don't have security in the population, when the banks go down, when the bridge, when the water stops, that's another loss of trust by the people. The second thing I would say is, I think we have, I don't know if I agree with Raúl. I don't think we're going to be able to get technology out of the classroom, or certainly out of our kids' lives. It's going to be there. The question to me is, how do we educate them to deal with it responsibly? I think we have two models. We have Common Sense Media, which is the largest model in America, where you're dealing with 10 million students or 100,000 teachers. That is at scale, giving curricula to public school, and I'm sure some private schools, to educate kids now to be responsible leaders tomorrow, where they'll be the leaders of parliaments or Congress people in the United States. I think we have an education imperative, which we're not taking seriously enough as a country. And we're also not getting any leadership from the federal government. But we had two incredibly interesting Italian experts today. And when I was in Italy last fall, I thought to myself, what do I know about global anything? But here we have the Catholic Church, the largest private school system in the world, huge, that is a vehicle for AI education curriculum to be brought into every parish, should they choose it, around the globe, to provide fundamental education on AI and how to use it responsibly at the lower school, middle school, and high school level. So I think to scale. So how do we scale this, and how do we scale it consistently at a high quality? Well, we have two things. We have a curriculum, and we have the largest school system in the world. And I think that's kind of at the level we ought to be moving.
And I know that we all want to support common sense to scale in the same way in Europe as it has done in the US so successfully, and we're all behind that, Jim. Josh, practical next steps.
I'll be real brief because I know we're short on time. I think one thing I did not hear today is what we do about marginalized youth that are in search of connectivity, that are feeling social isolation. I'm the author of the bill to age gate, to raise the minimum age to 16 in California, and to create oversight, since we have no oversight in the United States, the state of California. And there's general consensus for the big ball in the middle that overall children are being harmed. By the way, it's one of the last great bipartisan issues in the United States, Republicans, Democrats aligning together on that. But we haven't accounted for marginalized groups, LGBTQ plus groups, neurodivergent kids, kids in the foster care system, kids who are living in rural communities who are in search of connectivity. And while we can say, if we regulate in the right way, that the market forces will take care of that and cause innovation on other platforms, we can't risk any child to feel disconnected. And even though mental health rates for young people right now are an alarming rate, I mean, youth suicide's up 60% in the last 10 years, eating disorders 65, anxiety and depression even higher, especially for girls, but it's triple that for some of these marginalized groups. And so we have to be intentional, and we have to provide a pathway for everyone.
Brando. Brando, what have we missed?
Well, I think we need to be sure that we reach out to marginalized youth and that the opportunities are not there for those that are already connected. This is an issue when we deal, for example, with our European programs. We always have this question, can we really reach those that really need it? So I think that, as it was said, building strong networks for education, for building understanding, it's very important, because these technologies can easily create a context of manipulation without even people understanding it, to be used instead of using technologies. So I think learning is very important. But I want to be very clear, voluntary measures are useful, and we need ethics for rules to work, but we also need hard rules that can be enacted, that are also a deterrent from violating fundamental rights of children. Because today, this is an emergency, and we should treat it as it is. Thank you.
This may be an obvious point, but I think it's one worth mentioning. It's important for everyone here who's united by the concern about artificial intelligence and the impact of social media on children to recognize that your work collectively has power for all of us. Right now, we are in the second phase of our ongoing lawsuit against Meta, and our attorneys are making arguments in a court in Santa Fe about what is happening in Australia, about what is happening in the EU. We are holding up the standards that are being developed in the EU as a model of and an example of how these companies can come into compliance in the United States. So it's just recognize that you're part of a larger community, and whether or not you hear about it, we're lifting up this work every single day that in the work that we do. So we appreciate that.
And I do think it's fitting for us to end on a message of hope. We've created this village today. It's a global village. For the young people in the room today, we've got your future in mind. All the passion, energy, and action that will follow this is all for you. Thank you so much for coming today. And please thank the panel for their contribution.